There is a power in silence that most people underestimate. We often think that the most persuasive voices are the loudest ones, the ones that dominate conversations, the ones that always have something to say. But the truth is, sometimes the most impactful response is no response at all. Silence used wisely isn't weakness, it's wisdom in action. Think about it when emotions run high, when tempers flare, words become weapons. And once spoken, words cannot be taken back. They can leave scars. Silence in such a moment acts as a shield. It prevents escalation, it protects relationships, and it gives us space to think. It allows us to process instead of react. There are times when silence isn't avoidance, it's respect. Imagine listening to someone who is sharing their pain or their struggles. We often feel the urge to fix, to advise, to tell them what to do. But sometimes the greatest gift we can give is presence without interruption. Our silence says, I hear you, I value you, I don't need to outshine your story with mine. In these moments, silence becomes empathy. Silence also speaks when we face provocation. Every one of us has been in situations where someone tries to bait us into conflict. Responding quickly may satisfy our ego, but it rarely resolves the problem. Choosing silence here is not surrender, it's choosing dignity over drama. It's deciding that peace of mind is more valuable than winning a pointless argument. And silence can be a signal of strength and leadership. Leaders don't always need to fill the room with their opinions. Sometimes the greatest leadership comes from listening, allowing others to speak, to share, to contribute. Silence creates space where others feel safe to be heard. It is not the absence of authority, but the presence of trust. So the next time you feel pressure to speak, pause. Ask yourself, will my words add clarity or confusion? Will they build or break? If the answer leans toward harm, let silence speak for you. Because silence, when chosen with intention, is not empty, it's full of meaning. Pfeff keynotes of the speech, silence during conflict prevents escalation and protects relationships. Silence when listening communicates empathy and respect. Silence in the face of provocation shows strength and self-control. Silence in leadership empowers others and builds trust. Silence when intentional is not weakness but wisdom in action. Silence during conflict prevents escalation and protects relationships because it creates space for reason to rise above reaction. In the heat of conflict, emotions are often louder than logic. When anger drives the conversation, words become sharper, faster, and more dangerous. We say things that were never meant to be said, and once they are spoken, no matter how many apologies follow, they cannot be completely erased. This is why silence holds such incredible power. It interrupts the cycle of escalation. Choosing to stay quiet in a heated moment is not about retreating or showing weakness. It is about preserving the bond you have with the other person while also giving yourself room to think clearly. When people are arguing, each voice tends to rise in defense of its own position. The louder one person gets, the more the other feels the need to respond with equal or greater force. It becomes less about solving the problem and more about proving who is right. At this stage, communication has already broken down, but silence can stop the spiral. When one person refuses to add fuel to the fire, the conversation loses its rhythm of attack and counterattack. Silence breaks the pattern. It cools the temperature in the room and, most importantly, gives both sides the opportunity to notice how destructive the argument is becoming. Imagine two friends who care deeply for each other but get into a disagreement. One raises their voice, the other reacts, and soon it feels like the relationship itself is under attack rather than just the issue being discussed. In this moment, if one of them chooses silence, not the silence of withdrawal, but the silence of composure, it changes the energy of the exchange. The other person is forced to pause, to notice the absence of resistance, and that pause is often what brings perspective. It allows the conflict to shift from a fight for dominance to a search for understanding. Silence also communicates something words sometimes cannot restrain. Two, remain quiet in a moment when you feel every impulse to lash out requires a deep sense of self-control. That self-control becomes a protective barrier not only for the relationship, but also for your own integrity. In the aftermath of conflict, people often regret the things they said more than the things they did not say. Silence spares you that regret. It keeps you from contributing to the destruction of trust and closeness. Another way silence protects relationships is by giving space for emotions to settle before important conversations continue. No meaningful resolution can be reached when tempers are high. Silence acts as a pause button that allows clarity to re-enter the room. A person who chooses to step back and not respond immediately communicates, even without words, that the relationship matters more than the need to win. That choice communicates care. It says, I value this connection enough to not let anger speak for me. This unspoken message often carries more weight than any carefully crafted argument could. Silence can also demonstrate respect. When two people are in conflict, each side feels the urgency to be heard. If one person falls silent, not in a dismissive way, but in a way that shows they are giving the other room to fully express themselves, the dynamic shifts. The speaker feels validated because they are not being interrupted. And once they have fully released what they needed to say, they are more open to listening in return. This exchange strengthens the relationship rather than tearing it apart. It is important to understand that silence in conflict is not about ignoring or avoiding the issue. It is about choosing the right moment to engage. Silence buys time for thoughtful words later. It prevents hasty reactions and allows you to respond with intention instead of instinct. Think of silence as an investment. You hold back now to protect the future of the relationship. You wait until emotions calm, until the conversation can be had with clarity, and then you engage in a way that heals rather than harms. Even in professional environments, silence during conflict is a skill that prevents unnecessary escalation. Colleagues who rush to defend themselves in meetings often end up fueling larger disagreements, while those who remain calm and measured in silence give themselves the upper hand. Silence provides the opportunity to observe, to analyze, and to understand the other person's perspective before choosing words wisely. This creates a culture of mutual respect and trust rather than one of constant friction. In personal relationships where emotions run even deeper, silence becomes even more valuable. In families between partners or among close friends, conflicts are inevitable. But silence can be the bridge that prevents temporary anger from turning to permanent distance. In those moments, choosing quiet is choosing love. It is an act of protecting the bond, of valuing the person more than the argument, and of prioritizing the long-term relationship over the short-term satisfaction of being right. So when conflict arises, silence is not emptiness. It is full of meaning. It carries the weight of patience, the wisdom of restraint, and the strength of protection. It prevents escalation and safeguards the relationship from words that cannot be taken back. By staying quiet at the right time, you allow understanding to grow where hostility could have flourished, and you preserve connections that matter more than winning a fleeting battle of words. Silence, when listening, communicates empathy and respect because it shows the other person that their voice matters more than your response. In a world where conversations often feel like competitions, where people are waiting for their turn to speak rather than genuinely listening, silence becomes a powerful act of generosity. To stay quiet while someone else is sharing is to give them the gift of full attention. It tells them that they are not alone in their thoughts, that their experience is valid, and that you are willing to hold space for them without judgment or interruption. When people open up about their struggles, their pain, or even their joy, they're not always looking for advice. Many times they simply want to be heard. But human instinct pushes us to react quickly, to provide solutions, or to share a similar story from our own lives. In doing so, we unintentionally shift the focus away from them and onto ourselves. Silence breaks this cycle. By holding back words, we communicate, "This is your moment, not mine." That unspoken message is what makes the other person feel deeply valued. Empathy is not just about understanding someone's situation, it is about feeling with them. And silence is one of the purest ways to express empathy. When you listen quietly, you create space for the speaker's emotions to surface fully. They may cry, they may hesitate, or they may struggle to find the right words, but your silence reassures them that there is no rush, no judgment, no need to censor themselves. It tells them you are there not to fix them, but to walk alongside them in their vulnerability. That is what respect looks like in action. Consider the difference between two scenarios in one. You are sharing something difficult, and the person across from you keeps interrupting with advice, quick reassurances, or comparisons to their own life. In the other, you share the same story, and the listener stays quiet, nods occasionally, and allows you to pour your heart out without interference. The second experience is far more healing because silence and listening gives you ownership of your own narrative. It lets you feel seen and heard rather than overshadowed or corrected. Silence also deepens trust. When someone dares to be open about their fears or their struggles, they are taking a risk. They are exposing a part of themselves that they usually protect. If the listener fills that vulnerable moment with noise, judgment, criticism, or even well-meaning advice, it can break the fragile trust being built. But if the listener stays silent, maintains eye contact, and simply listens, the speaker feels safe. And safety is the foundation of every meaningful relationship, whether personal or professional. In leadership, this principle becomes even more critical. Employees, team members, or colleagues often look to leaders for guidance, but what they need first is understanding. A leader who listens silently without jumping to conclusions shows respect for the team's ideas and perspectives. It communicates that their voices carry weight in decision-making. Silence here is not passivity. It is a deliberate act of inclusion. It turns listening into a form of empowerment. In friendships and family relationships, silence when listening becomes a form of love. Children who are listened to without interruption feel that their thoughts matter. Partners who are given space to share without being cut off feel cherished. Friends who can sit together in silence, one speaking and the other fully listening, build bonds that last a lifetime. Respect is rarely about grand gestures. It is often about these quiet moments where one person gives another the freedom to be fully themselves. Silence also allows us to understand beyond words. People often communicate through pauses, tone, and body language as much as they do through actual speech. When we rush to respond, we miss these subtler cues. Silence gives us the patience to notice the unsaid, the underlying emotions, the hesitations that reveal more than the words themselves. By being silent, we become better listeners, more attuned to what someone truly needs, which may be comfort, acknowledgement, or simply a safe space. Furthermore, silence when listening prevents misunderstandings. Many conflicts stem from reacting before fully hearing or understanding what was meant. By staying quiet until the other person has finished, you reduce the risk of misinterpreting their message. You ensure that your eventual response, if one is needed, is grounded in clarity rather than assumption. This not only respects the speaker, but also strengthens the quality of communication overall. There is also a humility in silence. It acknowledges that we do not always need to have the answers, that sometimes the best response is no response. This humility builds respect because it shows that we are not trying to dominate the conversation or prove our wisdom. Instead, we are willing to learn, to simply witness another person's experience without centering ourselves. That kind of humility is rare, and because it is rare, it is deeply valued by those who receive it. Ultimately, silence in listening transforms the dynamic of any relationship. It shifts the focus from talking to connecting, from rushing to understanding, from reacting to respecting. It creates an atmosphere where people feel comfortable being real, knowing they will not be judged or overshadowed. And in that atmosphere, empathy flourishes, respect deepens, and human connection becomes stronger. Silence in the face of provocation shows strength and self-control because it reflects a conscious decision to rise above the urge to react. When someone tries to provoke us, whether through insults, criticism, or deliberate attempts to push our buttons, the natural impulse is to defend ourselves immediately. We want to strike back to prove a point, to show that we are not weak. But the truth is, reacting impulsively often plays right into the hands of the provocateur. They want a reaction. They want to see us lose control. And the moment we give them that, they win. Silence disrupts this cycle. It denies them the satisfaction of seeing us rattled and instead demonstrates that we are grounded, confident, and above the need for petty conflict. Remaining silent when provoked is not about ignoring injustice or allowing others to walk over us. It is about choosing the right battlefield in the right timing. Not every comment deserves a response. Not every insult requires a defense. And not every attack is worth our energy. By staying quiet, we communicate that we will not waste our dignity on arguments that have no real value. Silence says, "You cannot pull me into your chaos." It shows that our self-worth is not dependent on someone else's opinion or attempt to demean us. There is a strength in silence that words can rarely match. When you refuse to respond to provocation, you maintain control of the narrative. The other person may continue to try harder, escalating their words or actions, but the more they do so without a reaction from you, the more their behavior reflects poorly on them rather than on you. Onlookers can see the difference between a person lashing out and a person standing firm in composure. Silence becomes a mirror, exposing the weakness of the attacker while highlighting the strength of the one who remains calm. Self-control in such moments is not easy. It requires resisting the immediate urge to fight back, to satisfy the ego, or to settle scores. But that is exactly why it is powerful. Anyone can shout back when insulted. It takes a disciplined mind and a strong character to remain quiet and unshaken. That restraint communicates something larger. It tells others that you have mastered yourself. And mastering yourself is far greater than conquering anyone else. Think of situations in daily life. Perhaps a coworker makes a sarcastic remark in front of others to undermine you. Responding defensively may create a scene that damages your own image, but remaining silent, keeping your composure, and continuing with confidence sends a stronger message that their words cannot touch your sense of worth. Or imagine being cut off in traffic and provoked by aggressive behavior. Yelling, honking, or escalating may lead to regretful consequences, but silence, choosing not to engage, keeps you safe and keeps your peace intact. In both scenarios, silence is not weakness, it is wisdom that protects you from unnecessary battles. Silence in provocation also gives you the time to choose your response later if a response is even needed. Sometimes after reflection, we realize that the issue was not worth our energy at all. Other times, we may decide to address it calmly and constructively when emotions have cooled. Either way, silence preserves the power of choice. Immediate reactions rob us of that choice, but silence allows us to engage on our own terms. In personal relationships, silence during provocation can prevent lasting damage. In moments of frustration, people sometimes say things they do not mean. If you respond immediately with equal force, the conflict escalates into something far bigger than it needed to be. But if you stay quiet even for a few seconds, you create space for the other person to recognize their own mistake. Often, silence gives them the chance to self-correct, to soften, or even to apologize without the situation turning into a war of words. That quiet restraint protects the relationship from unnecessary harm. There's also a deeper spiritual or philosophical layer to silence in the face of provocation. It reflects detachment from ego. Ego demands that we defend ourselves at all costs, that we prove our superiority, that we never let anyone get the last word. But wisdom teaches that the strongest people are those who do not need validation from others. Their value is not determined by the noise around them. Their silence becomes a statement that their inner peace is untouchable. Silence, however, should not be confused with passivity. There are times when injustice must be addressed, when silence in the face of wrongdoing can be harmful. But even in those cases, silence in the moment of provocation can still serve us. It allows us to respond later with clarity and strategy rather than rage. A quiet pause can mean the difference between escalating conflict and creating lasting change. When provoked, silence is the armor that shields us from manipulation. It is the evidence of strength because it proves we are not easily swayed by external forces. It is the embodiment of self-control because it shows we can master our impulses. And it is a profound act of choice because it demonstrates that we know when to engage and when to simply rise above. In this way, silence does more than avoid conflict. It communicates to the world that strength is not measured by volume but by restraint. Silence in leadership empowers others and builds trust because it creates a space where people feel that their voices are valued. Leaders often feel the pressure to always have the answers, to speak first, to guide every discussion with their own perspective. While there is strength in offering vision and direction, There is also immense strength in stepping back and allowing others to fill the space. When a leader chooses silence during discussions, it is not a withdrawal of authority, but an invitation for participation. It sends the message that the room is not only for one voice, but for many, and that everyone's input matters. True leadership is not about domination, but about creating an environment where others can grow. Silence is one of the most effective tools in cultivating such an environment. When leaders pause before responding, when they let others speak without interruption, they encourage contribution and creativity. People feel safer to share ideas when they know they will not be cut off, dismissed, or overshadowed by the authority in the room. This safety fosters trust, and trust is what turns a group of individuals into a unified team. Silence in leadership is also a demonstration of humility. Leaders who do not feel the need to speak all the time show that they do not equate leadership with control. They recognize that wisdom is not monopolized by a single person, but is distributed among the collective. By staying quiet and listening, leaders acknowledge that others may have insights, experiences, or solutions that they themselves do not. This humility strengthens the bond between leader and team because people respect a leader who respects them in return. In practice, silence can be as simple as waiting an extra few seconds before responding in a meeting. Those few seconds allow others to gather the courage to speak up, to offer a perspective they may have hesitated to share. Leaders who fill every silence with their own words unintentionally silence the room. But leaders who leave space for others show that they value contribution over control. That space can lead to ideas that would otherwise remain unspoken, innovations that come from diversity of thought, and solutions that arise from collaboration rather than command. Silence also allows leaders to listen deeply. Too often, people listen only to reply, not to understand. A leader who practices silence while others speak demonstrates genuine curiosity and care. They are not rushing to impose their own view, but are absorbing what is being said. This deep listening allows leaders to grasp not just the words, but also the emotions, the concerns, and the unspoken needs of their team. People feel respected when they are listened to fully, and that respect becomes the foundation of trust. Furthermore, silence in leadership communicates confidence. A leader who is quick to speak, to defend, or to assert authority may actually be signaling insecurity, but a leader who can remain calm in quiet moments of tension, uncertainty, or even disagreement shows that they are not threatened. Their silence says, "I am steady. I am not shaken by noise." That steadiness builds trust because people want to follow someone who can remain grounded when others cannot. Silence also empowers others to solve problems on their own. Leaders who jump in to provide solutions at every turn create dependency. Their teams may come to believe that they cannot act without the leader's input. But when a leader stays silent and gives space for others to think, it encourages ownership. Team members learn to trust their own judgment, to take initiative, and to build confidence in their abilities. This empowerment not only grows individuals, but also strengthens the collective because everyone feels they have a stake in the outcome. In conflicts within teams, silence from a leader can also be powerful. Instead of immediately choosing sides or imposing decisions, a leader who remains quiet and listens fully allows all voices to be heard. This neutrality shows fairness and creates a culture where people believe that their perspectives matter equally. By resisting the urge to rush into conclusions, leaders model patience and wisdom, showing that the process of understanding is just as important as the outcome. Even in mentorship, silence plays a key role. A mentor who listens more than they speak allows the mentee to reflect, to think through their challenges, and to arrive at their own answers. The silence is not empty, but filled with encouragement. It says, "I believe you are capable of finding clarity." This silent confidence builds trust because the mentee feels supported rather than directed, guided rather than controlled. Ultimately, silence in leadership transforms relationships. It takes authority and turns it into influence. It takes power and turns it into empowerment. By choosing silence at the right moments, leaders shift the focus from themselves to their people, from speaking to listening, from control to collaboration. And in that shift, trust grows, loyalty strengthens, and teams achieve more than they ever could under the weight of a single dominating voice. Silence, when intentional, is not weakness but wisdom in action because it reflects the ability to pause, to evaluate, and to choose one's response carefully instead of being driven by impulse. In a culture that often celebrates quick comebacks, loud opinions, and constant noise, silence can be mistaken for passivity or lack of courage. Yet the opposite is true. It takes far more strength to hold back words than to unleash them without thought. Silence is the discipline of the mind and the maturity of the heart working together to ensure that what is left unsaid does not cause unnecessary harm and that what is eventually spoken carries greater weight. Intentional silence is not about avoidance, but about awareness. It is about recognizing the power of words and choosing to use them wisely. When someone stays quiet in a moment of tension or disagreement, it is not because they have nothing to say, but because they understand that timing and tone matter as much as truth. A wise person knows that the right word at the wrong moment can do more damage than silence ever could. They choose to wait until their words can build rather than break, until they can guide rather than wound. There is also a deep sense of clarity that silence provides. In the rush to speak, people often reveal only what is on the surface of their thoughts. But when silence is embraced intentionally, it creates space for reflection. That reflection leads to insights that would have been missed in the noise. Leaders, thinkers, and individuals who practice silence often appear wiser not because they know more, but because they pause long enough to understand before they respond. Their silence communicates depth, patience, and intentionality. In relationships, intentional silence allows emotions to settle before conversations continue. When people argue, they often want the last word, believing it gives them power. But the one who chooses silence demonstrates a higher kind of power, the ability to not let ego dictate behavior. This silence protects the relationship, shows respect for the other person's feelings, and creates room for reconciliation. It signals that preserving the bond matters more than winning the argument. That choice, made in silence, is wisdom in its purest form. In professional settings, silence used wisely often separates good leaders from great ones. A leader who listens more than they speak shows strength. They do not rush to dominate meetings or impose decisions, but allow time for different voices to contribute. This deliberate silence builds trust, encourages collaboration, and helps uncover perspectives that might otherwise remain hidden. It shows that the leader values understanding over control and wisdom over ego. Such intentional silence often leads to better decisions because they are informed by collective insight rather than individual haste. Silence also has the power to de-escalate conflict. When provoked, the instinct is to respond quickly and defensively, but silence sends a different message. It communicates self-control, maturity, and the refusal to be dragged into unnecessary battles. The ability to stay quiet in such moments is wisdom at work. It protects one's peace, preserves dignity, and often disarms the provocateur. Silence is not weakness here. It is a conscious act of strength that prioritizes long-term harmony over short-term satisfaction. Beyond conflict, silence becomes wisdom when it is used for listening. People feel respected when they are heard, and silence is what makes deep listening possible. By staying quiet and fully present, we understand not just the words spoken, but also the emotions beneath them. That understanding builds empathy and strengthens human connection. Those who can listen silently gain the trust of others because they prove they value presence over performance. Their silence communicates that they are not waiting to talk, but are truly there to receive and understand. Even in personal growth, intentional silence plays a vital role. It is in silence that reflection happens, that lessons from the past become clear, and that visions for the future take shape. The constant noise of life distracts us, but silence allows us to reconnect with ourselves. It is wisdom because it teaches us that not every answer is outside of us. Many answers lie within, waiting for us to quiet the world long enough to hear them. Silence also teaches patience. To remain quiet when everything inside us wants to react is to train the mind to endure discomfort. That endurance strengthens resilience. People who can hold silence in difficult moments show that they are not easily swayed by external pressures. They do not allow emotions or circumstances to dictate their actions. That restraint is wisdom because it keeps them aligned with their values rather than with the chaos around them. Ultimately, intentional silence is an act of choice. It is the decision to value peace over provocation, depth over noise, and wisdom over impulse. It is not an empty void, but a full space where reflection, understanding, and growth can happen. Those who embrace silence when it matters most show that they are not controlled by the need to prove themselves in every moment. They understand that strength is not about being the loudest in the room, but about knowing when silence speaks louder than words ever could. When we look at silence through the lens of wisdom, it becomes clear that it is far more than the absence of sound. It is a language of its own, one that communicates respect, empathy, strength, and clarity in ways that words often cannot. In conflict, silence shields relationships from escalation. In listening, it gives others the space to feel truly seen and valued. In moments of provocation, it proves our dignity and self-control. In leadership, it empowers others to rise and builds trust that no amount of speeches could ever achieve. And when chosen intentionally, silence becomes wisdom in action, teaching us that restraint is not weakness, but a higher form of strength. The challenge is not in speaking. We are surrounded by voices every day, but in knowing when not to speak, the wisdom to pause, to hold back, to let silence carry the weight of the moment is what separates impulsiveness from intention, noise from meaning, and reaction from understanding. In a world that often equates volume with value, the quiet ones remind us that sometimes the most powerful statements are the ones never spoken. And in those moments, silence does not just speak louder, it speaks deeper.